of the importance of this, first meeting, but also the fact that we had a very warm engagement earlier in the month leading up to this. It is a significant occasion because it's the first North South Ministerial Council in over 3.5 years, and the earliest opportunity for the restored Northern Ireland Executive to meet with the new government here. It was a warm meeting. It was a meeting which engaged our ministers, and there was a wide range of views on a whole range of issues. North-South cooperation is a key priority of our government, and I think today was a very welcome opportunity to re-engage and to reinvigorate this agenda. And our commitment on that issue is reflected in the commitments on the programme for government relating to a shared island, to enhance, develop and deepen North-South cooperation and the all-island economy, and to recommence regular meetings of the North South Ministerial Council, and in particular that there would be sectoral meetings between the ministers on an ongoing basis. So the meeting was extensive, it was constructive. We had a particularly good discussion on COVID-19, and the respective CMOs, Dr. Ronan Glynn and Dr. Michael McBride, presented to the meeting, they will follow up on those discussions, and our respective Ministers for Health, Robin Swan and Stephen Donnelly, will be meeting after lunch, and I think there's an agreed position to try and continue working together to have the optimal level of cooperation north and south. We noted that on the island the level of community transmission had been brought down to very low levels, and our objective is to keep them there. We had a general discussion on Brexit, and that the work that was previously undertaken by the Council would continue, and that our officials would continue to engage, particularly in terms of the technical aspects of the protocol, and of course the future agreement between the United Kingdom and the European Union. And we acknowledge we're moving into a critical phase in that regard in terms of timelines and the obvious need for preparedness for that. Good discussion on infrastructure, and particularly the commitments that are part of and were agreed by the Irish Government in the new decade new approach agreement, and we're particularly interested in the A5, the Narrow Water Bridge, and a whole range of projects, and we were particularly happy to be able to include support in our stimulus programme for the Ulster Canal, for the next phase of the Ulster Canal, and to support the feasibility planning and design works for the Sligo Enniskillen Greenway. And we had an animated discussion on greenways, and I think Minister Eamon Ryan announced his passion for greenways, so I think the island could be transformed over the next while in terms of that. In particular also, we agreed we will be undertaking a major study of the islands Belfast to Dublin, Cork, in terms of railway links and high-speed railway links between those cities. Again, the economic and tourism and relationship benefits of that are very obvious. And then wider look at improving connectivity between major urban centres on the island. And these are examples of the kind of practical, substantial work that can be achieved in relation to North-South, and the particular progress on health issues, for example, was noted at the meeting, was discussed in terms of cardiac surgery for children on the island in Crumlin, and of course cancer patients being treated in Altnagelvin, and that's the kind of approach that we want to see more of. So I thank Arlene and I thank Michelle and all the members of the Northern Ireland Executive for the very constructive engagement they had today here at this meeting, and I look forward to continued close cooperation and working together to face many of the challenges ahead of us on this island. Arlene. Thank
you, Taoiseach, and good afternoon, everybody. And I do want to thank the Taoiseach for hosting us today here in Dublin. I am pleased to confirm that we did have a very positive and open discussion across a broad range of North-South issues. And at the forefront of all of that, of course, has been how we have been dealing in our respective jurisdictions in relation to the coronavirus pandemic, which of course is a new virus, as we were reminded by both of our chief medical officers today, and one which we are continuing to learn about. And our respective governments, like those the world over, are of course facing a challenge that will shape our generation today and of course generations to come. And as leaders, we must step up and ensure that we steer the safest course to the brightest possible future for the citizens of our respective jurisdictions. I do want to take a very brief moment to pay tribute to all those who have sacrificed so much to ensure the safety and well-being of others on the front line, and in so many other settings, keeping the wheels of our countries turning, and indeed, of course, to remember all those who have lost their lives to COVID-19. Certainly the scale of the health crisis is unprecedented, and no one nation is unaffected. So collaboration and cooperation on a north-south and east-west basis is of fundamental importance to the well-being of our people and to the continuance of economic recovery and renewal. And the Deputy First Minister and I were pleased to speak with the Prime Minister earlier on today around COVID-19 management as well, in relation to his approach across the 4 nations of the UK. But as neighbours on this island, it makes sense to identify those areas of mutual interest, to share relevant information and indeed to act together when we can maximise benefits and enhance the well-being of our citizens. And that is of real relevance in our efforts in combating COVID-19. And it's also important to the delivery of projects set out in New Decade, New Approach, which of course can help us to unlock more potential in both of our economies. And of course we did have a very good discussion about the Sligo and Enniskillen Greenway, and if anybody wants any further updates on that, I'm very happy to provide those as well, because all politics is local, as we all know. And of course we spent some time as well speaking upon the United Kingdom's withdrawal from the European Union and seeking to benefit, get the maximum benefit for Northern Ireland. So it has been a very useful engagement today. It was good to meet with some old faces and some very new faces in the new government, and I think we've had a very worthwhile and productive meeting, and I look forward to welcoming the members of the Irish Government to our next plenary meeting, which will be in Armagh in December. And before then, we of course hope to have a British-Irish Council meeting with colleagues from across the rest of the UK to discuss issues around the common travel area. So that's all I have to say, and I'll pass on to Michelle.
Thanks, Arlene. And I suppose firstly to say that after 3.5 years, this is our first plenary in that time, and I'm delighted that the fact that we've now paved the way for many more meetings to happen across all the different sectoral areas of cooperation. I think that when we restored the Assembly and Executive back in January of this year, I don't think any of us would have predicted at that time that we would have been dealing with a global pandemic and that it would have taken us this long to get to this point to have this meeting today. So I very much welcome the fact that it has happened. But at the heart of restoring the Assembly and the Executive is the Good Friday Agreement institutions in their totality and our relationships in their totality. And that's relationships in the north, it's our relationships north to south, and it's also our east-west relationships. So the NSMC is obviously a cornerstone of the Good Friday Agreement and of all of that work. So today has been a very positive development, a very wide-ranging discussion, fair to say, and plenty more discussion to be had across a whole raft of issues, not least climate, greenways, as Arlene has mentioned, infrastructure projects, Brexit, and obviously COVID. So the connectivity issues across our island, very wide-ranging discussion across all of those things. I think it's interesting that we meet in this format today where we have 8 parties in government in some form or other and participating as part of our North-South meeting, but it just demonstrates, I suppose, the work that we have to do in the time ahead around on our areas of mutual interest for the good of all the people that live on this island and on these islands. I think that our cooperation is now more important than ever as we continue to respond to what is the biggest public health emergency which we have ever faced. And when we reflect on the previous months, we know that over 2,320 people have lost their lives on this island alone, and it's important that today we take time to reflect on all those that are lost and think about their families, and as ministers we would obviously extend our sympathies and thoughts to those families today. I also want to convey my gratitude to all those that have went above and beyond the call of duty throughout the pandemic and have helped us to make our way through unprecedented times. I just think it's a wonderful testament to the courage and the good in people, the generosity of spirit in people, as we've needed everybody to work together to get our way through the pandemic. As we all know, the virus knows no borders, doesn't care about spreading between Derry or Donegal or indeed between Dublin and Wicklow. So we need to continue to have that joined up approach as much as we possibly can. There obviously is concern around the issue of international visitors coming onto the island, and that's something that needs further discussion, both north-south but also east-west. So we have asked for a meeting of the British-Irish Council, and we believe that needs to happen as soon as possible. While COVID has rightly been the priority over the last number of months, there's also pressing concerns around the implications of Brexit. So we had a good discussion again around that today, and I think it's crucial that we continue to work together to ensure the best possible outcome for our citizens and for our economy. And I certainly welcome the commitment in the protocol to maintain the conditions for North-South cooperation. The other area which we obviously touched on today is where I started, in that we restored the executive 6 months ago, and there were very firm, strong commitments made in that deal in terms of commitments from the Irish Government. And these are, I think, very welcome developments, and we discussed those today, how we can start to put meat on the bones, how can we see delivery. We've all been preoccupied with dealing with COVID, but now it's time to focus on delivery of the New Decade, New Approach commitments. So there are long-standing infrastructure projects that will make a real difference as we try to build our economy, not least the A5 and the Ulster Canal, Narrow Water, the Greenways which have been referred to, the high-speed rail network. There are so many areas of cooperation where we can do good by citizens, and I look forward to seeing that work progress in the time ahead. So I think that today's meeting brings with it a new impetus to drive forward positive and productive North-South engagement, and it certainly marks the beginning of a whole schedule of meetings that which I very much look forward to working with all different ministers as we work together to deliver better for citizens.
Taoiseach, First Minister, Deputy First Minister, in relation to the virus challenge, there are different regimes, different regulations in place in relation to travel on both sides of the border, and it is causing, to say, confusion, it's putting it mildly. Was there any concrete progress made in attempting to deal with that anomaly? On the question of Brexit, I note from your press release that you will be meeting again in December, but by then Brexit will have moved on significantly. Is it your shared position that a no-deal Brexit would have negative consequences on all parts of the island? And finally, Taoiseach, you're in the company of two visitors who have practical experience in the business of power sharing. Is it your view that when a member of the government votes against a government position or abstains from it, that a 2-month penalty that involves 6 weeks of recess is appropriate? Thank you.
Thank you, Tommy. First of all, in relation to the travel, we had a very useful presentation from the Chief Medical Officers, and in fact, Dr. Glynn would have given a presentation after that on yesterday's numbers in the Republic and explained the background to them in terms of the factory and so on. The significance of that, Tommy, is, and this would have been advice conveyed from the World Health Organization as well, the key is your testing and your contact tracing and keeping pressure on the virus wherever it emerges. And so that can never be lost sight of as we learn to live with COVID-19. The travel is complex. You said it yourself, different regimes, different jurisdictions, different approaches. We've taken a cautious approach in the Republic in respect of the Green List. There was a very useful, I think, exchange between the two health ministers. I think Robin Swan wrote to Stephen Donnelly, for example, in terms of sharing information around the passenger locator forms. Now, there may be issues around that, but we've agreed to take that forward so that we'd have a greater knowledge, if you like, and greater opportunity in terms of contact tracing. Also, the First Minister and Deputy First Minister have sought a meeting of the British Irish Council to look at this on a broader basis on the travel issue, which we subscribe to that idea of having such a meeting. And I think that would give a wider opportunity to discuss what are undoubted complexities here. We all have travel advisories, known as banned planes from landing anywhere, but the numbers have dropped in overall travel terms. We must keep sight of the reality that travel has collapsed. And if you just look at the figures, and there are really implications there and so on for travel and tourism. But essentially, we're very possessed of the idea that we do need to share and stay as aligned as we possibly can. I think that was a shared expression at the meeting today. And the Ministers for Health will have a meeting now after lunch to see can they take forward that issue. The second point on Brexit, again, there is work underway in terms of the protocol as part of the withdrawal agreement. A lot of technical aspects. I think it's fair to say there has been progress in principle in relation to the operation of the protocol. And then there's the future relationship between the United Kingdom and the European Union agreement. And as members of the EU, we will continue to be engaged in those discussions. I think it's the shared position of all of us that we want ultimately an agreement that optimises the economic situation on the island of Ireland and for our citizens, and that there are no barriers or no to continuing trade, and we have free trade, quota-free, tariff-free, and that we can create opportunities out of this as well, and basically to limit any negatives that might potentially emerge from Brexit and see can we capitalise on any opportunities, but above all to protect livelihoods and to protect jobs. That's the key. In terms of power sharing, and we do learn from each other from time to time, and it was pointed out in a humorous way at the meeting. And, but in terms of the situation that you're essentially referring to, look, each party has internal disciplinary procedures, and you know, it's been the month we've had in Parliament in terms of the amount of legislation that has passed. It's been at breakneck speed. It's been long days, long hours. A lot of it to underpin our response to COVID, a lot of it to underpin our July stimulus programme in terms of access to credit, microfinance, supporting business, protecting tenants. So inevitably in that situation, situations like last night can develop. So I think overall, you know, we're in a position where, you know, I think we're very pleased with the legislative output of this government in 1 month. It's been quite extraordinary. I haven't seen a month like it, and I've been a long time in Dáil in terms of the substantive nature of the legislation that's passed. So Eamon Ryan spoke to me last evening and spoke to Leo Varadkar as well. And you know, we're proceeding and keeping our eye on the substance of the programme for government, the policy that has to be implemented. That is my unrelenting focus, I can tell you.
Well, in terms of the travel issues, Tommy, I think there are two separate issues. There's the issue of the common travel area, which we have asked for a British Irish Council to discuss. Obviously, we're very much aware of what's been happening in England over this past couple of days, and we note what is happening there, so we feel that there is a need to have some conversations about the common travel area. As you know, at the moment, the common travel area pertains in Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. The Republic of Ireland has decided that anyone coming from the common travel area, apart from Northern Ireland, will need to quarantine. So we need to have discussions around that, and I think there's a common understanding that we need to have those discussions, and hopefully that meeting can take place sooner rather than later. And then in relation to international travel, there's a need for a discussion on the location of international travellers when they come through Dublin, and so that there's a good sharing of information, and I'm very pleased that the health ministers are probably having that discussion now as we stand here. In terms of Brexit, of course, we want to see a comprehensive free trade deal free trade and free quota deal, and I welcomed the commentary in relation to whilst there is to be no borders north-south, we certainly don't want to see borders developing east-west in relation to trade either, and I think that was a very welcome situation. As for advice on power sharing, I think that the Taoiseach is very well capable of making his own mind in relation to those matters.
I suppose just in terms of the travel piece, I think people have to hold their hands up and say it's a confused picture in terms of travel because of the differences across the island and even between the two islands, and I think there are anomalies there that need to be dealt with. It's a public health emergency, so we should approach all these things from a public health standpoint. There are particular sensitivities, obviously, which we're all mindful of, but for me, what we need is a public health solution to deal with the issue of travel, and I look forward to us having a BIC meeting, a British Irish Council meeting, as a mechanism for us all to be able to sit down and talk about what are the practical solutions that we can find to deal with the issue of travel. I think that it is very positive that there has been good work between our two health departments. However, I think there is obviously always room for improvement, but as we speak, Arlene's correct, our two health ministers and CMOs will be meeting, and one of the things that we actually discussed today is the use of the travel locator forms. How can that be tightened up? How can we make sure there's a strong interaction in terms of information so that we can very easily track any case? I think if you reflect on the first case, this is one of the things we talked about earlier, the first case that was detected here was as a result of a traveller coming into Dublin, but we're very quickly able to be traced, and I think that's our track and trace operations are very important. So I think we need to be more joined up than ever in terms of leading our way through the pandemic over the winter months, because we know that's going to be a very challenging piece. On Brexit, time's running out. We're at the 11th hour. We have about 4 months left before we get to the end of the year, and what we have is a situation where businesses in the north, citizens in the north, are still confused about what actually is going to be the outcome. So what we need is certainty and clarity, and we will continue to work with everybody to make sure that we get that certainty and clarity as quickly as possible. But for us, the protocol, we have to have the protocol implemented in full. That gives us the protection and recognises our special and unique circumstances across this island in terms of protecting the North-South trade, in terms of no hard border on the island, and these are crucially important things.
Ministers, Tracy McGee, UTV. Can I ask, First Minister, you talked there about the meeting that you had with the Prime Minister. You'll be aware that the Scottish Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, is now advising Scottish citizens not to travel to the north of England where there appears to be an outbreak. Would you have that same advice for people in Northern Ireland? And for the Deputy First Minister, you have mooted in the past the possibility of some sort of quarantine or restrictions for people travelling in from GB into Northern Ireland. Given the fact that we're now witnessing what the Irish CMO has described as a concerning spike of cases here in the Republic, would you be calling for the same sort of measures for people travelling from the south into the north? And finally, Taoiseach, you spoke there about the need to give certainty and clarity to people. We're waiting on this British-Irish Council meeting. Do you accept that, our British-Irish Conference, do you accept that there is urgency now for people who are making decisions about holidays today, tomorrow, the next day, that they need to know right now, and they need clarity and certainty to have confidence?
Well, the reason why, Tracy, I said there was a difference between the common travel area issues and the international travel piece was because we are monitoring international travel all the time through our joint biosecurity centre to find out what the prevalence rate is in the various countries. You will have seen that we had to act in relation to Spain. Luxembourg has since gone onto the red list as well. And so what we've said to people in our travel advisory is very clear, that we would much prefer them to stay at home and have a staycation. And to discover parts of Northern Ireland maybe they haven't been to for a while. But if they do decide to travel, they need to be aware of the risk, and they need to be aware that they may have to quarantine when they come home. So I think that is clear in relation to that risk. And I do regret that some people who were in Spain had to quarantine when they come home, because I know the impact that will have in terms of their jobs, in terms of their families, and unfortunately that has been the case. But our primary purpose is to protect the people of Northern Ireland and to keep the virus to a low level. To your point about what has happened in England overnight, we did have that conversation with the Prime Minister this morning. He was very clear that he's taken action to deal with it in terms of local lockdown provisions, the fact that he has actually delayed some of the actions which were to come into force tomorrow. He has taken action in relation to that. And again, we have warned all along that when we give indicative dates for some of these things, that we may well have to push them out further because of circumstances changing, and I think that that is reflected in what the Prime Minister has said today. As regards travel advisory within the United Kingdom, we will have those discussions, but I have to say the common travel area is key for us economically, it's key for us socially, in terms of families moving about, people that work on the mainland come back to Northern Ireland at the weekend. We will have to, of course, look at all of this in the round, but it is important that we keep it in proportion, and as the Taoiseach says, we need to look at the absolute risk in relation to the numbers of people travelling, because it is important to recognise how little people are travelling at the moment, and generally when they are travelling, it is essential travel that is taking place.
Tracy, you know I've expressed my concern in relation to travel from Britain onto the island because of the prevalence rates, and we know that that's also a changing picture every day. So we've seen in recent days where we have in Yorkshire and parts of Manchester where we have lockdowns, regional lockdowns. That appears to be a feature. We've locked down, or we have issues in terms of clusters here in the south, but we also have had our own outbreaks of cluster Limavady, for example. That appears to be the trend that is coming at us, so we have to be able to lend ourselves to deal with that. I'll always be guided by the public health advice, and that has to be how we approach this. We have to approach it in the fact that, you know, there are sensitivities. We need to be mindful of all of those sensitivities. But that's why I think the British Irish Council could allow us to find a publicly health guided practical solution that allows us to look at how can we protect the common travel area, which has served us all well for many, many decades. So how can we protect the common travel area, but do so with the advice of our CMOs. So I look forward to us getting that meeting as quickly as possible, because I think that allows us an opportunity, or affords us an opportunity to find a practical solution.
The first point I would make, as has been said earlier, too many people have lost their lives as a result of COVID-19, and our sympathies are always with the families of those who lost loved ones. In addition, we now know, as we learn more about the virus, that it has potential long-term damaging impacts on people's health, and more evidence is emerging to that effect. So that is really the very grave backdrop to any advices that we issue. And hence our Chief Medical Officer has been, and the NEFIT, the organisation that provides public health advice to the government, have been very cautious generally about the travel. But they've equally been very clear that the most important way of protecting oneself and one's community from the virus is human behaviour. Social distancing, washing one's hands, and you know, the coughing and sneezing etiquette. And we're probably, you know, we have to keep repeating that, because even if someone has travelled, it is the subsequent behaviour of that person that will spread the virus. So we would have had incidents where someone attends a party with 30 or 40 people. Therein lies the danger. So we have to keep that in perspective when we debate this. And I think we also have to acknowledge that in the Republic and in the North, the level of community transmission has been brought down significantly. That needs to be acknowledged. But however, the danger is, you know, we don't want it to go back up again, because we're watching what's happening in France, Germany, Spain, Portugal. We can see in the UK in areas there's a pattern of increased spikes. In our context, and the CMO made a presentation, it's not clear yet whether the 85 yesterday is a pattern or an issue that relates to a particular cluster in a particular setting that had a knock-on to the living quarters of where the workers lived. But what was reassuring from what the CMO said was the testing and tracing capacity to get at that and try and isolate that. And that's what Mike Ryan of the WHO consistently says. You've got to keep the pressure on the virus. Where it breaks out, you get there quickly, you test people, you contact trace, and you isolate. And that still remains the key way of dealing with this, because we're going to have to learn to live with COVID-19. We're in a different phase to the earlier phases. going to have to live with it, try and keep society relatively reasonable for people in terms of living and the economy as well. But that said, yeah, the British Irish Council will be helpful in terms of having a wide range of inputs, but it will be challenging. This is not going to be easy in terms of the travel issue. Let's be clear about that as well, but we will do everything we possibly can to minimise any risks that emanate from different travel advisories from the different jurisdictions. We've been very clear, very, very clear, the safest thing to do right now is not to travel. That's our advice. People do need to know what the incidence of the virus is in different countries that they may be travelling to or travelling back from. And I'd finally say that travel has collapsed. If you compare the numbers this month to last year, it's quite extraordinary. But nonetheless, we have to be very vigilant about this.
Can I just first of all ask you on a more humorous note, is it true that the two Northern Ireland politicians started the meeting by offering yourself, Leo Varadkar and Eamon Ryan, advice on how to power share? And secondly, on a more serious note to the First and Deputy First Ministers, the Northern Ireland app is up and running today. There appears to be a problem with regard to iPhone 6s and older iPhones. And a third question to all of you, picking up on the point that Tracy was making, that there is the reality of the common travel area, there is the reality of the border, and for practical reasons it can't be closed. This is probably the last event of this political season. You were talking about the British Irish Council meeting to look at the whole issue of international travel and all the travel issues, but isn't it a reality that's not going to happen within the next few weeks? And with people going on their holidays now, everything might be seen to be long-fingered.
Well, I don't mind kicking off. Isn't a bit of levity a good thing? We were just remarking on the fact that you have 3 parties in government and we have 5, so there are challenges to manage any kind of system of governance of that nature. So we got the meeting off to a good start. On the app, we're actually very pleased that the app has been launched, and actually before it's actually been formally launched, it was taken up within the first 12 hours by over 50,000 people. So that's something that's very positive. We were very keen from the very start that you needed an app that, if it was going to be effective in terms of tracing, that it actually could move north, south and east, west. So we've achieved that, and that's a good thing. There were concerns around the platform, so what you could download it onto, so an iPhone 6 or a lower number, or some other platforms it wasn't compatible with. So there's a problem insofar as then it doesn't become available to some people, unfortunately. But anybody with an iPhone 6 up can indeed do this. This is actually an issue I raised with the Health Minister, because I was afraid in case it would create a health inequality, that those that could have a phone of a higher iPhone 6 or higher could actually have access to this, and those that couldn't think. So just to say, the app is one part of contact tracing, so it's one part that will enhance the traditional calling people, writing a list of who actually you were in touch with. So people will still obviously have an opportunity to avail of that. The BIC meeting, I think, needs to happen very quickly. We're in a pandemic. We're not out of the woods. We're still in the middle of it. So whilst political season may be coming to an end, we as ministers and as leaders in government have responsibilities that don't stop because of the political season coming to an end.
Well, just to say, Shane, we were so well socially distanced in that huge room that I had to stop myself from actually saying, in the manner of Father Ted, I don't know whether you're small or just far away. It was a very good meeting, I thought, for those of us who have been at those meetings before. It was a positive engagement. I think it worked very well over the range of issues that we discussed. The Northern Ireland app, we have been very pleased at the take-up already before it's actually officially announced. I think the official announcement was to be this afternoon, and nearly 80,000 people have already downloaded the app. But as Michelle says, it is an addition to our shoe leather, if you like, test and trace strategy, where people are identified and then their contact, their the people that they've come into contact with are contacted and given advice. So it is an additional part of that, and we recognise that some people may not at this stage be able to download it, but I'm sure the people who develop the app will be looking at all of that. And as for the BIC, there's no reason why it can't be a virtual BIC. And we can have those conversations virtually if people are in different places. We do think that this is a conversation that needs to happen, and we hope it can happen as soon as possible.
Could I say, I may have jokingly invited some advice at the meeting. We had a good laugh in terms of the wider nature of political engagement. But I have no sense, by the way, Shane, that this is the last political event of the season.
Yes.
I don't know where you got that from. And I certainly don't have that sense. And also I would say, because of COVID-19, this is evolving, and we'll be keeping a very close eye on this issue. So that's one point. On the app, I think we're delighted that there's interoperability between the Republic's app and the app in Northern Ireland, which is a further sign of alignment and reflects the ongoing efforts where we can to align issues and policies and initiatives. And that's the entire agenda. And one positive dividend from the app is the level of awareness it again raises in people and in the community about the ever-present dangers of COVID-19. Because people can get wary of all the messaging, so you do have to keep on innovating, keep new ways of getting the public engaged and keeping the public engaged, and the app has been a wonderful way in Republic for doing that. I think it's 1.5 million have downloaded it now, and in the north it's just moved very quickly. So that is very reassuring in terms of the public's level of engagement with this issue.
Following on from Shane's point, maybe there will be a virtual British-Irish Council in the coming weeks. We'll have to wait and see, but obviously that will take a while to organise or to try and convene. So is there any scope in the interim, given that it is peak holiday season, for there to be some kind of convergence between the international travel advice between your two jurisdictions, or do you all believe that it needs to happen on a British-Irish level, that there's no scope for it just to be bilateral between you? And also, Taoiseach, can I bring you back to the Green Party? You've made your point about wanting to focus on delivery and legislation and so on, but surely it must raise some concerns with you that so early in the term there's already such voting indiscipline within the Green Party, and that the same level would obviously not be tolerable within your own ranks. You must have concerns about it happening elsewhere in government.
Well, will I take that first?
Yeah.
First of all, in terms of the virtual British-Irish Council, okay, that's one aspect of it. And I think in terms of the two ministers, the two ministers of health are meeting right now to progress issues, and an idea that Robin Swan had in terms of can we collate information more. Obviously there might be issues around that, but we want to work on that. Because we also acknowledge the realities that there are different jurisdictions with different CMOs who come forward with maybe nuanced advices, and those are realities, but nonetheless both CMOs will continue to engage in this issue, and it's moving. Why is it moving? Because you see what's happening in France, you see what's happening in Germany, you see what's happening in Spain. These numbers are going up very, very significantly at a rapid pace. What the lessons for us really there are, we've got to pace how we reopen. We've got to take stock. And I think, relatively speaking, North and South are managing this relatively okay so far, but it's going to take ever vigilance. I mean, I touch wood, so to speak, in terms of this issue, because this is a vicious virus. It spreads like wildfire in certain settings. That's just not phenomenon on the island of Ireland. It's a phenomenon all over the world, particular work settings, particular congregated settings. We've dramatically increased our health testing of nursing homes, for example, on a systemic basis, which has yielded good results. We're very conscious we have to keep pressure on that side, well, not pressure, but keep pressure on the virus in terms of that regular serial testing of those settings that could enable us to be ahead of the virus. And in terms of the situation, I've been in governments before, and so I don't get totally, phased by events that occur. I think we've it's very important that we stay steady and focused on the policy issues, because actually I think there hasn't been enough discussion about the substance of government, the substance of politics, which is about economy, which is about social issues. So, we've had a very substantive, comprehensive return to school roadmap, which I think a lot of people were taken by surprise in terms of the extent of that, the resources going in behind it, and the wide-ranging nature of it, the July stimulus. On the discipline issue in terms of parties, each party will have different approaches to how they deal with members of their party. I think Eamon Ryan has spoken to Minister O'Brien in relation to this. He has taken steps. As far as I'm concerned, there are different ways one can approach this, but the parties are different in that respect. But we want to really keep the focus on the policy agenda, and particularly the autumn schedule, where there'll be significant legislation on climate change. We want to move on a marine development bill, which is very important in terms of unleashing the economic potential of our seas, and also the Land Development Agency bill in terms of the housing issue. What people may not realise is we've had intensive meetings of cabinet subcommittees on health, on housing, on climate change. We'll have another today on social inclusion, all within the last week or so, notwithstanding all the other issues that have been going on.
Well, in terms of the common travel area, of course, that's a matter for the two sovereign governments. They have control over the common travel areas, and it's in recognition of that we asked for a British-Irish Council meeting so that we could discuss those matters. But again, I go back to the international travel piece. We have in Northern Ireland very few international flights at present. Those that are, we do have the online locator. We do have Border Force and Police Service of Northern Ireland working together on touching base with those people to make sure that they are where they say they are going to be. So it's those sorts of discussions that the two health ministers are having now at the moment about the location of international travellers when they come onto the island of Ireland, and we're looking forward to hearing how that discussion goes, and probably it'll be an evolving picture, because it is about the absolute risk and the fact that we want to make sure that we know when people come on to the island of Ireland where they are, and how we can make sure that they're not bringing COVID in and spreading it around the people of Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland.
As I said earlier, I believe the travel piece is confused, and I think that there needs to be a lot more work done to try and iron out the anomalies. So you have two choices: you either try to iron those out, or you try to mitigate against the difference. And that's, I think, what the two health ministers are trying to do today, with looking at, for example, the travel locator forms and the sharing of information. So that doesn't need a BIC meeting in order to do that. That just needs the practical outworking. I think we all recognise today the tremendous work that's been done across the island in terms of being joined up. We have the Memorandum of Understanding in terms of the approach, our two CMOs being very joined up. But clearly there's always room for improvement, and we look forward to, as we plan for what comes at us in the weeks and months ahead, that strong cooperation continues, and there are practical things that we can continue to do, and I hope that's what we continue to do.
First Minister, do you have any concerns about this new shared island unit that's been set up with the Department of the Taoiseach, which is seen by some as the first step of the Irish government eventually laying a ground towards a border poll at some time in the future? And Taoiseach, as the head of the South Side Republican Party, is that the ultimate goal of this new unit? And separately, you've said there the need to be cautious and the need of certain settings in relation to the spread of COVID. That sounds like as though the country isn't going to be moving to phase 4 next week. The publicans are looking for a lot of clarity. Is it not time to give them that and say you either are or aren't opening, so they can prepare either way? Just in relation to the pubs, is it not time to give them that clarity?
Well, in terms of the shared island unit, I've been asked about this on a number of occasions. We do share an island. We are two jurisdictions on the island, and I will never shy away from coming to speak about my unionism and why I believe in the union between the different parts of the United Kingdom. Indeed, I was down in Killarney not so very long ago, speaking about that from an economic point of view. So I think there's nothing to fear from having discussions around these issues. It will not change who I am or what I believe in, but I do think it's always good to talk and to share information, and we've shown, I think, through the way in which we have worked through COVID-19, that actually the sharing of information that benefits all of our citizens is good for us all, and it doesn't threaten our constitutional position position or what we believe in. So I don't feel threatened at all by the shared island unit, and I have to say everybody knows my position in relation to a border poll. If it was called today, of course people would vote in Northern Ireland. Michelle will take a slightly different position to this, I think. Would vote to remain within the United Kingdom, and therefore I have nothing to fear from that. But I think we have a lot of things, and the Taoiseach has talked about the substance of politics. I think we have a lot of things to focus on at this present moment in time, not least how we recover and renew from COVID, dealing with the virus, making sure that we suppress the virus at this time, making sure that our children can go back to school and get the education that they all need and they all deserve. And of course we have to deal with the issues surrounding the United Kingdom's leaving of the European Union, which is coming very quickly as well. So there are a lot of big issues to deal with, and I've no doubt that that will be where the focus will be for all of us.
Well, there's nothing self-styled about our status as a political party from our inception in 1926. And the idea of the shared development unit is, we do share an island, and it's not preempting anything. It respects fully the political positions of different traditions on the island, and it respects the different perspectives. But it also believes in the Good Friday Agreements esprit de corps, which is relationships between Britain and Ireland, which has been key, and it's improved so dramatically ever since the agreement was signed. Over 30 years, that whole relationship has transformed. The British-Irish relationship, the North South relationship, I think has improved dramatically over that 30-year period as well, in very practical ways, and the relationship between the two traditions within Northern Ireland. And so our agenda is really around developing how one shares an island together. Even today we had very good illustrations on the health front, for example, of how we do share in a practical way to the benefit of our children, to the benefit of oncology patients in the North, West, through sharing each other's ideas and facilities. And likewise, the work of Waterways Ireland, or work on the Ulster Canal and the whole canal structured across the island. Greenways, you're going to see a lot, I think, more development on that front. Increased engagement all around between the different sectors of society. And in Brexit, for example, lots of people meet. They're all concerned. I mean, if you're a business person or a company, you're worried about supply chain, you're worried about all sorts of issues and complexities that may emanate from that. But we need to do a bit more work on that as well, and in terms of nurturing that relationship, understanding more how we can more proactively share and cooperate on the island. That's the agenda, and there's no hidden stalking horse type approach to this at all. And we will have that up and running, and I think we'll do important work in that regard. In terms of phase 4, there's set timelines, and the Cabinet will meet on Tuesday to consider this. Obviously, we have to get advice from NEFIT, and again, I wouldn't draw too much from yesterday's figures, and I certainly wouldn't take the conclusion you took from my earlier remarks that was not intended in that way, because obviously the CMO and those will want to see, is there a pattern emerging, or is this a cluster that can be controlled, has been controlled, and is under control? Yes, and I think makes sense, given yesterday we get to see a pattern over the next number of days.
Just to come in on the first question which you've asked of Arling, I think that, I welcome the fact that this unit has been established. I look forward to seeing what actually it does in terms of the conversations which it's going to start. 22 years ago, when I, as a young activist, voted for the Good Friday Agreement, I did so because it was giving the people the opportunity to decide the constitutional position, and that's what I work for every day. So it's not about, it is very much about, for me, how do we convince people who the merits of a new and agreed Ireland, and I think now is the time for us all to have that very mature, inclusive conversation, because certainly I, as a United Irelander, don't wish to see a United Ireland just for Republicans. It has to be for everybody who lives in this island. So I think that there are lessons to be learned from the Brexit debacle, in terms of people having information, so that when the question is put, the people actually have the fullness of information. So I think it just makes logical sense for us to have the types of conversations that are inclusive, that we understand where all of our fears, all of our aspirations, and then can we arrive at something that's better for us all.
Just a question for the Taoiseach in terms of COVID. What are the likelihoods that we will see localised lockdowns as we've seen in the UK? Is that something that's under discussion? And also in relation to COVID, SIP2 have called for Mark McSharry to withdraw his remarks that the Irish public sector are lazy and sitting at home watching box sets during the pandemic. Will you also call for him to withdraw those remarks? And thirdly, can I also just get your reaction to the Supreme Court judgment in relation to the government's climate plans, that it's excessively vague? Could I also ask a question to the Deputy First Minister? You said that, as far as you're concerned, that there was a confused picture in terms of travel. Can I ask you, what specifically do you think are the most confusing aspects? What needs to be addressed immediately? And finally, a question for the First Minister in relation to Brexit, 4 months left. What are your red line issues, if you can use that phrase, as we come up to December? Thank you.
Well, in terms of Brexit, I can answer that very quickly. We need to see the promises that were put forward, and some of which have actually made their way into the command paper from the United Kingdom in terms of unfettered access for our businesses, being able to trade with their largest market, which of course is Great Britain. So we want to make sure that that is the case, and that we don't face any barriers to doing trade with the rest of the United Kingdom, because that's hugely important for the people of Northern Ireland and for all of our business interests.
Could I just say 3 questions there? First of all, on COVID. Again, we're not... I think the first phase is over, and so that a lot of lessons have been learned from that phase, and the CMO will say that to you. And so their responses in any further ways will be different. But what we're at now really is enhancing the testing and contact tracing and making sure that's robust. We feel that's so important in terms of dealing with the next phases. It's why we were so conservative on travel. I mean, there was a lot of, I want to say, excitement around the Green List, but it was fairly underwhelming in some respects in terms of travel. So we've taken a very cautious approach on that. But that was motivated by why we want to get the schools open. We have objectives here. We want schools open in September, the end of August is so important to the children. Their own life development, and in terms of their whole social psychological development, that they're back in school. We want to try and do more with non-COVID health in terms of diagnostics and getting people treated, and we're worried about that. So that will govern our approach. So we're not, we'll take it one phase at a time, one step at a time, and we're going to try and manage this, whilst at the same time keeping some degree of normality for people as they go about their daily lives. That is the real challenge now. And I think even at the meeting we discussed this, it's about how does one live with COVID whilst maintaining some quality of life for people as they go about their daily lives, and economy, how do we keep the economy going? And if you look at the May-June retail figures, June was particularly significant. I think it's the largest record in ever. It's still below last quarter last year, but still, what that suggests to me is that as you manage this, there will be elements of the domestic economy you might be able to keep going, but there'll be aspects around travel and tourism that will be problematic for the foreseeable future, and a lot depends on the virus. In terms of what I've learned, and the earliest lesson we've all received from the COVID has been the superb response of the Irish public service. My long-standing political philosophy has always been around the need and requirement to have a strong public service and to invest in that public service. I don't agree with Mark's position on this at all. Sometimes I would have been criticised in the past through various partnership agreements that we would have initiated as a party about policy around the public service. But never did the concept of a strong, independent, objective public service emerge so tellingly than in this crisis. Be it in health, be it right across the board. The Garda Síochána are doing extraordinary work. And invariably when we say, public transport masks must be worn, the backup in terms of the protocols for pubs even, and the gastropubs. The backup is the Garda Síochána. And the whole lockdown, the Garda Síochána were there. The healthcare workers have been at the front line. I know in my own department, public servants have been flat out since the beginning of COVID, dealing with every latest iteration of it. And I think that, to me, is the strength of our public service. And I think it's something that we should celebrate. Celebrate might be the wrong word in terms of the context of COVID, but acknowledge and reflect that every modern society needs a strong public service to get us through moments of this kind, once in a 100-year event like a global pandemic. That's when your public service comes to the fore. For me, it means never let that go. When we get over the bad times, never let that go, that concept of the importance to democracy and to a stable society, the importance of a strong, high-quality public service. There will be challenges in that public service, of course, we all know that. Thirdly, I'll examine the Supreme Court judgment in relation to that. There will be lessons to be learned from that judgment. We'll have to apply those, and the government will no doubt give it serious and considered examination.
Well, just to pick up then finally on the point around the confusion. So I think it's confusing for citizens insofar as we have two jurisdictions on the island with two different approaches, and that in itself is confusing. So people hear things about red list, green list, non-essential travel, encourage you to stay at home. That is a confused picture then for citizens. So that's why we feel that the anomalies need to be addressed as quickly as possible, or we at least need to mitigate against the challenges that are presented to us. I think that we are one island, and my own personal view is that we're one epidemiological unit, and we should use that to our advantage.